help to you.
All right, well, we'll begin in that case. Welcome everyone to CDAC, Commission of Inquiry of Discrimination Against Christians. And our witness today is Reverend Mr Moodley. And it's a privilege to talk to you. Thank you very much for coming. We've got an additional 2 commissioners joining us today. Reverend Linda Rose. Hi, Linda. Good to see you. And Robert Harris, who is also very well known to the Commission. We're going to proceed, if it's okay, dear, first of all, by giving you an opportunity to outline your case and what's been going on with you. And then we'll go through in the normal way. Perhaps we'll start with Linda and then with Robert, asking you questions for clarification. And going through that process, I might pick up on a few questions as well then. And then perhaps we'll have another round and then an opportunity for you to close, and we'll take it from there. And a reminder to anybody who is listening, we're not reaching decisions or conclusions here. This is really very much an investigation to listen from you about what's been going on and about the discrimination that you feel that you've faced. So dear, if it's okay, thank you very much. We'll start with you and I'll hand over to you, and perhaps you'd be willing to just outline the nature of your case, which is before us today.
Super. So once again, thank you. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity this morning. It's my first time being introduced to this commission. I'm glad for the invitation. So thank you for having me. My name is Mr Moodley. I'm a pastor of a Reformed Baptist Church in Bristol, United Kingdom, called Spirit of Life Reformed Baptist Church. We're a small congregation made up of about 15 different nations. We're a predominantly non-white congregation, and I say that because that has bearing on the case that we took forward to the constabulary. Around about 8 years ago, our church came under the spotlight in a very small way through Christian Concern, because part of what they call the Bristol Four were arrested in Bristol, one of them being a deacon of our church was arrested for preaching the gospel in the city of Bristol. At that time, I was not involved in any of the public preaching. I supported it wholeheartedly as a pastor, but I never went out on the street to preach. When we went to court, and sat in the court to hear the Crown prosecution make their case in Bristol, 2 men were eventually charged. One man from the UK and another man from the United States were charged with because they were speaking to a Muslim, a homosexual, and they answered questions from the public. So they didn't go out preaching about the subject. They were asked questions. Anyway, the Crown prosecution made the case that the King James Bible, especially the word abomination, should not be used in the public square at all. In other words, the Bible should not be read in the public square. As a pastor, I sat there and I was particularly embarrassed for my own life, because I thought, I'm very safe in my pulpit. I teach on total depravity. I teach on the sinfulness of man. I teach on how man is to repent from his sins, be it one sin or another sin. And nobody's stoning me in my pulpit. Nobody's arresting me in my pulpit. Nobody's challenging me in my pulpit. And I felt very convicted by that. And following that, I decided with my church to go out into the public square to start preaching. And my church said, you're not going to go alone. We're going with you. And so that's what we did. We've been doing that ever since now, for the last 7-8 years. Less frequently than we used to, due to medical conditions that I have and so forth, but 2 Saturdays a month. One of the lessons we learned from that case, when I asked the men who were arrested at that time, what lessons do you think you've learned from this case? In other words, surely not everything you did was right. Obviously, the constabulary arrested you. Anyway, that case went to trial. They lost the case, and the Christian Concern appealed it, and the judge threw the case out on the 2nd day. So that case is done with. Those men were not charged. But when I spoke to this man, I said, what can we learn from this? And so as a pastor, I'm very keen to, like I said to you when I began this conversation, what can I learn from this? I'm always on a journey of figuring out what we can learn from each other. So I decided that I'm going to go to the constabulary and say, listen, let's not let this happen again. You've arrested these 2 guys. You've clearly lost the case. This is an embarrassment for you. You're using taxpayers' money to pay the legal bills, blah, blah, blah. Let me work with you to see how we can do this better. We're going to go preaching. So the constabulary said to me, they've never heard of this before. Nobody's approached them to say, can we work with you? And they kept bouncing me around from one person to the next. Nobody was willing to sit down with me Eventually, I sat down with an inspector, got to know him. He's involved in the community. And he even said to me, "This my request is very unusual. They've never had somebody like approach them and say, how can we work with the constabulary?" And so I began a journey with them. I used to meet every month, talk about how the police were interacting with us. And one of the reasons why the police was interacting a lot with us is because they were getting a lot of complaints. And the complaints were really about the crowds that were building up. So our preaching is very interactive. So I will take a question from the public, provided that I can ask a question back. So if an atheist asks me a question about the Bible, I'll say, I'll answer your question, provided I can ask you a question back about your belief. And so the crowd starts to gather like that. So the crowd will go from 2 people to 100 people in a matter of minutes. And amongst the 100 people, for example, there are those who would be listening eagerly. There are those who are troublemakers. There are those who are seeking to destroy signboards, damage property. So the crowd is varied. And over the years, we found that there were people in the crowd that were calling the police because they felt offended by what was being said. And one of the things we made very clear is we have an internal policy as a congregation. One of the policy statements is this: that if we go to court, we must be able to provide to the court what we said, why we said it, which source did we get it from. So if we're speaking about biblical marriage, when we're speaking about gender, sexuality, abortion, whatever it may be, we must be able to provide from the Bible where we got this from. So open the Bible in the court. And so that's one of the things we do. We always made sure we've done that. The other things, like, for example, when the crowd gets too big, we have a policy to step down. We disperse the crowd and then we step back up and preach again. Because we don't want to be Christians who are accused of breaching the peace or not keeping the peace or be the ones that have instigated violence in the public square. So we step down all the time. And I have a good team around me who knows how to keep me in line and get me to step down when I lose my temper sometimes, or I get angry or get passionate about something. They're able to pull my coat and say, "Pastor, you need to step down for a minute." And so that's what I do, is step down. So we've had all these internal policies, and we took that to the police. And we said, "Now you work with us." And they found it very difficult because they were carrying their own personal biases. And when they were coming to the preaching, they very often would reject what we were saying and believe the crowd. For us, we felt like it was, give us a Barabbas situation. Don't give us Jesus, give us Barabbas. That's what the crowd wanted. And they would be moved by the crowds and seek to stop the preaching, so forth and so on. So we would work with them. We'd step down, we'd take their information, and I would take that information back to the constabulary every month. And I'll sit down with the inspector and say, "Hey, listen, this is what happened here. How can we improve this?" And he would say, "Okay, this is what we need, training." So really, we were involved in training the constabulary on how to respond to public preaching in Bristol. And my hope for that was, how could we roll this out to the nation? How could we roll it out to other constabularies? So I began to work with the inspector on that, and he thought that was a really good idea. Literally, I can say to you that there were times when the constabulary actually sent us letters of apology to say a certain inspector on the beat had acted illegally when they seized our signs, when they tried to stop us. So had I not brought it to their attention and spoke to them, they wouldn't have realized. I don't know if they would have realized they were doing something wrong. They were breaking the law. They're breaching and infringing on our rights, so forth. So nevertheless, when the police would come out, if we were getting assaulted, if our signs were being destroyed, the police would often say, "Oh, we didn't see it. They had no personal witness of it. And if a crime is committed, we'll try and get it on CCTV. But eventually they'll say there's no coverage on CCTV," and so forth and so on. And so these cases kept building up, and we kept working with the constabulary to such a point where one organization called SARI, SARI, in Bristol, they work with a lot of people from non-white communities, got to know about us, and they said to the police, "We would like you to send out officers every time Pastor Dia and his church are preaching. We'd like you to send out officers to be with them." And one of the reasons why, like I said initially when I began, we're a predominantly non-white congregation, and we were not only were we religiously attacked, we were racially attacked. For example, go back to your country where you come from, you don't belong here, those sorts of things, to disrupt the preaching, to upset us. So this group, SARI, said to the constabulary, we're counseling you to send officers every time Pastor Dia and his congregation preaches. And that's what was happening for about 2 years. 1.5 to 2 years, officers would come out. But these officers were not happy to be there, obviously. They were not happy to be there. So what was happening was They were going to people in the crowd and telling people in the crowd, listen, this man is deeply offensive, don't listen to him. And if you want to complain, we're ready to take your complaint. So people don't want to complain, but the officers were going to people and asking them to complain. And over a 6-month period, 6 months to a year, they built up a case against me and my congregation by going to people and asking them to complain, by suggesting that I'm offensive and suggesting that I'm speaking against their religion and their beliefs and so forth. I continued. I didn't know this was happening. They were sending officers undercover to film and to record and ask questions of the public. And I didn't know this was going on. I took it that, these are men of the law, men and women of the law. I respected their authority. But we were kind of a little bit naive with this. We trusted them. And one day when I went for a meeting with them, as I usually do on a monthly meeting, to sit down and talk about how we can better our improvement, get feedback from them on how we could improve our place in the public square and how they could improve. While sitting down at that meeting, I was introduced an investigating officer. And the investigating officer said to me, she started the time clock, she put the camera on, she said, now that you're here, we're going to tell you that we're serving you with a warning notice. And the warning notice is that I wasn't allowed to speak to an evolutionist. I wasn't allowed to speak to an atheist. I wasn't allowed to compare Christianity to any other religion. I wasn't allowed to use any language that was derogatory against the LGBTQ plus community. I wasn't allowed to use any public address system. I wasn't allowed to play any sermon of myself on a PA. I wasn't allowed to invite anybody on my behalf to Bristol to preach. So that was about 80 or 90% of the points on that warning notice. I refused to sign it, obviously. I did not accept it. I didn't think we were breaking the law in any way. I was told that if I did not sign it, it would escalate into a criminal case if I continued to preach. Well, obviously, I refused to sign it. And the part of the conversation there in that meeting was one of the lead inspector was actually the perpetrator behind the investigation into us. He's a so-called Christian. I believe he's from the Church of England. I can't actually prove that. But he said to me, well, Pastor Dear, you need to understand that it's down to interpretation of what you're saying. I said to him, sir, this is the law. We're here to talk about the law. If you want to have a lesson in hermeneutics, we can very well do that at a separate Bible study. But this is not about hermeneutics. This is about the law. Tell me what law I've broken. He said, oh, we have other police officers who are Christians. They go to church and they don't agree with what you're preaching. And I said, listen, absolutely. I understand if they don't agree with what I'm preaching, and we can have a separate Bible study about that. But this is not about hermeneutics. This is not about interpretation. This is about the law. Which law am I breaking? He refused to answer the question, served me with the notice and said, you have to comply. Obviously, I didn't accept it. I took a copy of it and then decided to take the case. Went back to my congregation, spoke to my congregation, decided to take the case forward. I have my personal reasons as to why I didn't go to any Christian advocacy group. My conviction was that I didn't agree with some of the things that were being done by certain groups. And if I went to them for help now, I'd be a hypocrite to go to them for help. So I decided to fund the case myself. And it was a big step for me because I put my house on the line for it. And a law firm picked up the case. They were interested in it, and we decided to take the constabulary to court. About 2 years later, 1 week before the case could go to court, the constabulary settled out of court and agreed that, in their words, that gosh, I forgot the words right now. Let me just think about the words. It'll come back to me in a minute. Where their action against me was wrong, was too hard, was something to that effect. The words will come back to me in a minute. I should have had it written down, but it'll come back to me in a minute. But that wasn't the only thing that they produced. In the course of them preparing the case, they prepared a 19-page document, and the 19-page document included testimonies from shopkeepers, and on the shopkeepers' point of view, we as a church don't stand in front of any shop at all. We don't hinder any trade to such a point that if the crowd even grows, we actually, like you heard me say, we step down so the crowd can disperse because we don't want to stop any trade. So on the shopkeepers' front, we were not obstructing anyone. On the amplification decibel level, we were way within the decibel levels for Bristol because Bristol has no policy on decibels. But we implemented our own policy to keep it low, where it's not shouting in people's faces. We kept it. they'd gone to the Church of England in Bristol, and the bishop here in Bristol had written, well, I think it's the bishop, it's because it says she. They tried to redact all the names from the report, but there's a she said. And the she said from the Anglican Church, from the church here in Bristol, was that Pastor D and his congregation have no idea what sin, hell, and judgment is. It's layers and layers upon a tradition. In other words, we need to go and relook at what the Bible says. And then they suggested we come to the Church of England to learn about their books and their policies on gender and sexuality and so forth. So they'd gone to the Church of England to recruit help to stop me from preaching, to stop us from preaching. Also part of the document was 3 or 4 pages from the officers who were assigned to be with me for that year. The officers had said that my preaching had caused them traumatic breakdowns. Then me preaching about Jesus Christ being the only way, the only truth, and the only life, and me talking about abortion in the sense of life begins at conception, and we as Christians value the sanctity of life, and that we believe that marriage is between a man and a woman, and all our discussions about we're not evolved from a monkey and so forth and so on, and here's how we prove Darwin wrong. All of that preaching, whether it was one subject or another, was giving these officers a traumatic breakdown that they didn't want to come to work. So they were reporting mental illness because of my preaching. So there's 3 or 4 pages of officers of saying that this is what's happening. And so it was really a funny thing, really, that the constabulary has become so soft that the preaching of someone's words can cause such damage to them. And I fear to think what will happen when they confront a burglar in my house one day. So we eventually took them to court over this, and they settled out of court. They agreed that they should not have done that. And since then, I've been appearing on various programs from Fox to GB News to other places and podcasts and so on, talking about the case. And my case really is not to draw any attention to myself. I believe, like you believe, that everyone should have the freedom to speak what they need to speak. That allows, I don't want to shut the Muslim down. I don't want to shut the Jehovah's Witness down, or the atheist down, or the evolutionist down, because I want to hear their point of view. That's the reason, that's the way we preach. If I don't hear what you're saying, I'm unable to bring my rebuttal. And so I want to hear what you're saying. I want to hear. So when we get people from the Catholic Church or the Anglican Church or whatever, disputing with us over doctrine, even in the public square, if I don't hear what they're saying, I'm not going to be able to respond to them. So I want to hear what they're saying. So we don't want to shut them down at all. So we believe that our win is a win for everybody, not just for Christians. It's for everybody in our city and everybody in our nation. And that this kind of speech should not be restricted or hindered in any way. I'll close with this. I think it's rather funny, unusual, that atheists and evolutionists have become such a protected group in the United Kingdom, that their belief system is so fragile that a 58-year-old man like me standing on a ladder with the mic can pull the rug out from under them with my debate or discussion about the Bible. So that's how they were being kept by the police, that nobody could challenge them at all. On the comparative religious part, yes, we do compare Christianity with other religions. That's called apologetics, if we know it in Christianity. We try to bring a good apologetic for the defense and the hope that we have. So comparing Christ with, comparing the Bible with the Quran and the Bhagavad Gita and other books is what we do usually. So I easily do that in the public square. I actually did it on Saturday with very good result. And that's my opening statement.
Great, dear. That's, I mean, quite remarkable. And there's a whole load of detail. You've sent us a lot of documentation, which is very comprehensive. Thank you very much for that. I got a load of questions, but I'm going to go to my colleagues first and let them, if it's okay, dear, ask you questions, clarification, follow up, anything they want, further detail on, etc. And we'll start, if that's okay, with Reverend Linda Rose. Hi, Linda.
Hi, Tony. Thank you very much. Dear, thank you for joining us today and for giving your testimony. I have to say, I'm quite astonished at the impact that you describe, because, very often street preachers today, they seem to have very little effect. So, what you describe is absolutely amazing. Can I just ask you, first of all, how have you achieved that? Are you actually holding a complete service out on the streets? And you talk about amplification. What is being amplified? Have you got a choir there? Or can you give me, a greater feel of what it is that you're actually putting putting out?
Okay, so that's a good question about service. No, it's not a service. We don't believe that the service is actually for the public square, but for the gathering of God's people in the church. So it's not a service. We're having an outreach, according to the Great Commission. We're having an outreach, but ours is very strategized in the way we go out. So, for example, when we go out in the next Saturday in March, it will be scriptures that have been prepared by me and the people who are going to speak. So we don't let anyone speak without a prepared scripture. Which takes us back to what we said earlier on, in that if we get arrested or go to court, we must be able to say, this is what we spoke from. So all the men who preach with me, whether they come from our church or they come to our city. So even if you come to my city and you said you want to preach with me, or if a man wants to preach with me, he has to bring a letter from his church to say that he's in good standing with his church and his church has blessed him to come and preach with us. So he's not some loose cannon. And that's another thing I'm trying to address, is there are too many loose cannons all over the UK preaching on the streets. They have no accountability. At the end of the day, I'm not a street preacher, I'm a pastor, which means my place in the public square, where I've got to be above reproach, comes into standing. So my behavior is important in the public square. So therefore, I'm very careful in what I say, how I go about it, and how I respond to people. So number one, we don't have services. Number two, it's an outreach. And number three, the construction of it is, we pick the subject, we pick the scriptures related to that subject, and we'll stick with that subject for the entirety of 4 hours. So we preach from 12:30 to 4:30 on a Saturday. The entirety of that 4 hours is, we'll get up to speak, we'll hold up a sign that says ask any question, and people step up to ask questions and challenge. And from that, the preaching just progresses and progresses and progresses to such a point where people will hang around afterwards to say, how do you know so much about Islam? How do you know so much about the Hadith? How do you know so much about the Quran? And they end up coming and asking questions, and we stay off until later, till 5 o'clock and so forth, answering questions one-to-one.
Right. So would it be true to say that, I mean, you say it's outreach. Are you specifically picking up on an issue each time? So will you specifically say, this Saturday we're going to go for Islam, or this Saturday we're going to look at abortion, or we're going to look at same-sex marriage? You know, what's the primary focus? I'm trying to get a picture of why you provoke so strong a reaction.
Okay, so all of our preaching is gospel preaching. So even on the abortion issue, we're not pro-life protesters. So if, like, for example, on the abortion issue last Saturday, the scripture we went to is Exodus 20. We speak about the 10 commandments. Thou shalt not murder. So it's a breach of the commandment. How do you keep this commandment? You keep this commandment by obeying God. And so everything is being drawn back to salvation in Jesus Christ. So that's gospel preaching through a particular subject. So whichever subject we're preaching on, it's gospel preaching through that subject. That subject is drawing the attention of the people, and through that subject we would be speaking. So it's a very similar model that Jesus used, that Peter used. Jesus would take an earthly example and draw and make a heavenly principle from it. He would use a door to say, I am the door. We know he's not the physical door. So we could stand there literally with the door and talk about Jesus Christ, except that this is the subject we spoke about on Saturday. And then as we get towards the end of March, beginning in April, we'll speak more about the resurrection. We'll have a cross, why Jesus went to the cross, and so forth and so on. So the subjects change every month. Sorry, the reason why we get such a strong, I'm not going to say a strong opposition, I say a strong interest. The opposition is there. So we get a strong interest because I think it's meeting people at a point where they can make their challenges and have questions answered. So on Saturday, we had young people who've never had the question answered on the matter of abortion, about rape, incest, affordability, medical conditions, what is an abortion, how do you define a fetus? Literally, we were educating people in the public square on Saturday. And people literally came up and said, thank you, I didn't know this. Men are coming up and say, thank you, I should be thinking more about this. But so it's education, it's spiritual preaching. The overarching thing is gospel preaching anyway.
And you're mainly impacting the younger generation, are you? Or are you getting a broader audience, if I can put it that way?
The younger people show a particular interest, not mainly for wanting to know. They show a particular interest because they want to cause trouble. But the causing of their trouble, God uses for his glory, in the sense that they learn something in the process. And that's what we realize after many, many, many years, and we'll continue to do that. So we don't neglect or reject the troublemakers. We know how to deal with them. We know how to. So, for example, even when a child is there oh, sorry, when a young person is there, we often ask them, when they come up to us, Christians, who are you here with? Are you here with your parents, and so forth and so on. So we're trying to make sure that they're not minors, they're not acting alone in the public square. And that's a difficult part for us, because these young people would very often swear and curse and say things that you would think, how can it come out of a young person's mouth? But when the police come to approach them, they'll call themselves minors, and things like that. So that's a difficult thing for us to transition through, but we're trying to work that through. But to answer your question, the crowds are varied. On Saturday, we had a whole group of men, probably in their 30s and 40s on one side. They had a group of young students before us, probably high school, university students, about 10 or 15 of them on here, and a whole group of another maybe middle-aged people on this side. So the crowds are varied, depending on the time of day, depending on weather, so forth, so on. But the crowds are varied.
But you know that you're going to get an element of troublemakers. And you said in your testimony that you become aware that the police were actually stirring up trouble a lot of the time, which of course they're not allowed to do. So I found that an extremely interesting comment.
Well, sorry, let me just say, sorry to interrupt you. The reason why we came to know about that is the police went to a particular person and said to them, this person is offensive. Would you like to complain to him? What they didn't realize is that they'd gone to an ex-police officer who was a Christian. And he came up and told us. And I just said how good God is. I'm going to testify to God. This is how good God is, that he made us aware of what the enemy was planning. And we took that to the constabulary, and we got a letter of apology from the constabulary for that. But that didn't stop them from continuing to gather information and build a case.
Yes, extraordinary, actually, because I mean, they're very much acting like an agent provocateur, which, of course, is completely out of bounds. The complaints that you said you've received, are they mainly from, again, I'm trying to build up the picture here, people passing by because they're being obstructed from going into shops? Are they from shopkeepers saying this is distracting people? Are they from members of the LGBT community who said we find this offensive? Are they from women who are pro-abortion? Where have the main focus of these complaints come from? And have you been made aware of them each time? Because I'm just tying up to what you say about the police and how they have actually provoked comments.
Sure. The shopkeepers have not in any way. In the last 8 years, we probably had one particular shop that's made a case of trying to obstruct us. We have a shop called Mankind. They sell these gifts to men. And we've had a guy there fly a drone into us a number of times. So they sell these drones. And he literally takes a drone and flies it into us and flies it into the boards and so forth. We've had that kind of attack. And he's the one that's been the main perpetrator, one that's leading all the shopkeepers to make their complaints. Apart from them, we've had no other shopkeeper come up. We don't stand in front of any shop entrance. I made that clear. It'd be unfair of us, unchristian of us to do that. We don't do that. We find locations where, for example, if there's a big shop, long shop, and we're far away from their entrance, we do that. Also, what we have in our city is a number of shops that have closed down. And so their shops have become boarded up. And so we stand against that. And that's really, we stand against it because we've also learned that if our back is exposed to the public, I got beaten up a number of times. I got knocked unconscious once, suffered a concussion and things like that, because people come from the back and take a swipe at you. So we learned to put our back against a particular shop or a wall. But again, we find shops that are empty to do that. And then we also very respectful of the buskers that are there. If somebody's busking before us, we don't go anywhere near them. We don't go near the Jehovah's Witnesses. We don't go anywhere near folks that are already there. It's respect that we have for people in the public square. If you're there before us, we'll wait for you to finish, or we'll find another place that we can go to. So we try our best not to hinder public. At the end of the day, like I said, I'm a pastor. The preaching of the gospel here is to protect the testimony of the gospel in the sense of the value of the gospel. The value of the gospel is not an unnecessary hindrance to somebody. It is the good news to people that must be proclaimed the right way. And so we try not to be a hindrance to any shopkeepers. When you talk about the complaints, obviously, yes, a vast number of the complaints have been from people so for example, why would the police say, don't talk to an evolutionist? It's an evolutionist that has gone to complain. But what's he complaining about really? What is it that me as a Christian, a small church pastor, can tell an evolutionist that he feels threatened with? Well, here's what I told him. The thing is, I think in a lot of cases, they think that we Christians are really uneducated. They think that we cannot give a good answer. They think that we didn't attend school. The thing about me is, before I became a pastor, I was a lecturer of anatomy and physiology. I taught at a leading medical university in South Africa, and so I taught emergency medicine. So my understanding of obstetrics and gynecology, of the body and so forth, so on, is very good. And so my answers come very quickly to me. And so if you challenge me about the body, about any, I can answer very quickly. I can answer from science very quickly. Literally last year, outside the University of Bristol, a science lecturer came out and said to me, you're making an argument from scripture about the conception of human beings. Why can't you answer from science? I said, okay, I put my sign away. I said, let me walk with you into the library right now. And let's go and find any medical textbook that tells you that life doesn't begin at conception. And he stretched his hand out and he shook my hand. He said, yes, you're telling the truth. So I said, so why are you siding with these people who want to destroy my science today and want to shut down teaching? Do you know what he said to me? He said to me, I have no other choice. This is a leading university in our city. He said he has no other choice. If he agrees with me, he knows the consequence of it. And so he's denying facts for that. So we're presenting the facts in a case, and they don't want to listen to the facts. For example, life begins at conception. So literally on Saturday, we had young people Googling what fetus is, because they don't know what fetus is. They're making an argument from something they don't understand. So they literally, I got pictures of young people Googling on their phone, because that's what I did. I said, okay, when they said, oh, it's not a baby, it's a fetus, I said, okay, good. What is a fetus? Do you know? No. Okay, let's stop right now. Go Google it and come back. Send them to Google it and come back, and then we have a discussion. And so it's absolutely wonderful. It's beautiful to see when the wheels are turning and the lights come on. It's a beautiful experience. But obviously, there were people who didn't like it. I had food thrown at me on Saturday, I had water poured over me, and so forth. And those are the people who will complain. The police did come. They responded to somebody's complaint, and the police said, no, we know this man. He has every right to preach. Nothing he's saying is offensive, and he's done it very respectfully, and they didn't hinder us in any way. But the people were prepared to complain because their worldview is being challenged.
Mm.
I hope that answers your question.
Describing is very much an assault on you regularly, from the sound of it. Have you ever brought actions for assault against these people? Have the police ever intervened to stop what is clearly an assault?
Well, that's a good question. It's not only me that's been assaulted. My wife has been assaulted. My wife accompanies me all the time for all my preaching. She's one of my firmest and safest points of inquiry when I'm either right or wrong. She can judge the crowd. She knows what's happening. She got assaulted very badly. One time when the crowd couldn't find stones to throw, they bought potatoes and hurled it at me. But because they couldn't hit me, they hit my wife. And she bent over. I could literally hear the thunder. She bent over crying. She was in so much pain. And I stepped off the ladder and I was crying. I stepped off the ladder. I said, no, enough. There's a crowd of about 120 people. I stepped off the ladder. I said, enough. I'm not going to preach anymore. And my wife, with tears in her eyes, bent over. She said, love, don't stop preaching. Preach. And I got back up on the ladder and I started preaching with tears in my eyes. Friends, I want to tell you, for half an hour, the whole crowd went silent. They went silent. And I preached the gospel unhindered for half an hour. Nobody challenged it at all. And the Muslim man came up to me afterwards and he said, why? Your wife got beaten up. You're getting beaten up. Why are you doing this? Why don't you just go home? I said, because I love you enough to tell you the truth. And I'm doing what Charles Spurgeon said, or hopefully doing what Charles Spurgeon said, that we have to preach the gospel in such a way that we have to stand between the sinner and hell. That if he's going to go to hell, he's got to climb over me to get to hell. And that's what I believe we're doing. I believe we're standing between them and judgment. And if they want to go into judgment, they got to climb over us to get to judgment. So I'm going to do everything I can to reason with them. I'm going to hang on to their ankles. And I'm going to say, please reason with me concerning your sin. And I'll do the best I can. If they want to go, they'll have to climb over me to get there.
Thank you, dear. I will have more questions, but I
Okay.
think let's not monopolize here. And hand over, Tony, back to you. And
Right. Thank you very much, Linda. Very insightful questions. And you're going to get some more insightful questions now, I know, because Robert is great with the detail. Robert Harris, over to you.
Thank you, Tony. Good morning, dear.
Morning.
Has there always been a police presence during your public preaching?
No, there hasn't. So initially, when we started preaching, there wasn't. So for about a year or so, police would arrive based on complaints from the public. The police would also arrive if we would complain, but the response would be very different. When we say that we've been assaulted, here's the person, they wouldn't. I can put it this way: when an officer arrives on scene, he comes with a particular look on his face. He comes with a particular mindset, and we can see that bias being displayed in the officers. And I can understand that very well. Sorry if I'm trying to expand on your question even more. I can understand that when a female police officer arrives and we're talking about abortion, I can understand that. And I spoke to the police about that. I said, I recognize that. She may have a particular bias about it. She may have a particular view about it. And she's a woman at the end of the day, or a man who's having to respond with his own worldview. But I often said to them, you're wearing a uniform on that day, and you have to abide by what the constable oath says. And you got to put your bias aside. And we spoke a lot about that. Initially with the inspector who was interacting with me every month, and he agreed with me that officers absolutely should not bring their bias to such a point where this inspector who was dealing with me, sorry to go on about this, Robert, but the inspector who was dealing with me left, and he was replaced by another female inspector. And I had a meeting with her, and she said to me, Pastor Dia, I absolutely hate you. She said to me, I absolutely hate you. She said, I heard you preach at Bristol Pride, and I absolutely hate you. I was one of the officers in charge. She said, I did not like anything you said. But here's what she said. She said, I am now the inspector in charge. And she put her hand across the table and she said, if any of my officers break the law, you tell me personally, call me personally and tell me. She said, I will back you up 100% if they've broken the law. And that's what we want to hear. That's really what we want to hear. But unless we sit down with them like this and talk with them, we're not going to get we're not going to build that type of relationship with them.
So, I mean, were the police present at most of your preachings?
They were present after the Sari group had counseled them to be present, because they were the group Sari was afraid that there was much danger to our life, in the sense of we were being assaulted and so forth, and threatened in many ways. I mean, I get a lot of things thrown at me, liquids and stuff, and we were being threatened with, like, people were saying they're going to urinate in a cup and throw it on me and things like that. And we were scared of these acid attacks and things like that. So we went to Sari about that, and they told the police to be present with us when we were preaching.
And when the police were present, would it be one officer there or more than one officer?
So initially they started bringing, it depends who was available for that shift. So the PCSOs would be the ones who would come out initially. And then there'd be one PCSO and a formal constable. Or other times there'll be two constables. But most of the time it was the PCSOs who had very limited powers. So even when things were getting out of control, in the sense of the crowd, and we backed down, the crowd is pushing against us or whatever, the PCSO will come and say to us, right, they literally have no power. They can't do anything. We have to call in the main officers.
I see. On those occasions when you and your wife experienced violence from people within the crowd, and also racial abuse and other forms of abuse, were there police officers present on those occasions?
Yes, there were. And the police officers.
What happened specifically?
Well, that's what made one of the reasons that made our congregation not trust the police. But the police were present, and when we'd call them and say, "Here's the person who hit us. Here's the person who destroyed us," and literally standing still there, the police would say they didn't see it themselves, so they were not witness to it. So in other words, I'm not going to take your Christian word for it. They didn't see it themselves. Therefore, they're not going to act. And they come with the attitude like this, like this. So you know what you're going to expect from them. And if we about a year and a half ago, we had a young man really being very, very violent towards us, and the police officer was standing right there, and we have it on our body cam recorded that we called the officer 9 times to come and help us, and he refused. He just stood there. He absolutely refused to come and help. And when he eventually did come and help, he didn't help us at all. He just said, you've asked for this, you've called it upon yourself. You shouldn't be here speaking on this subject. If you want to be safe, go home. That's what he's saying.
You described an occasion in your introduction when I think you said you got knocked to the ground and you suffered a concussion.
Yeah.
Was there an officer present on that occasion?
The officer was not present on that occasion, but we managed to get the person who was the perpetrator of the crime. The police investigated it, but I was forced into going towards what they call a community resolution. It just caused the injury to me caused me harm. I couldn't preach for a couple of weeks. I couldn't do my study and so forth and so on. But yet, no matter how much I tried to press the case, I was told by the investigating officer that their sergeant, their line supervisor, did not want this case to go to court. And so they pushed me towards a community resolution, which was a letter of apology from the person. So not even an anger management course, nothing. A letter of apology, which I never saw really.
You never received the letter of apology?
No, I didn't receive it, no.
And the other occasion when your wife, when someone threw potatoes at her and her eye was hurt and so on, was there an officer present on that occasion? Yes, there were officers. And what was the response?
Again, they didn't take any action because, again, I think also in their favor, in a crowd of people, unless we know who they are, we can't really say who threw it. Like on Saturday, we had food thrown at us, and the officer said to me, "Do you know who threw it?" And I could say, "Yes, just that person that threw it." But we know. Other times, we just don't know. But what we're relying on is officers to say, "Okay, you've been assaulted. They're going to go and look at the CCTV. We've got a lot of cameras everywhere. Or can we have any footage that your people have or whatever?" But we were not met with that sort of welcoming our complaint, welcoming that we want to bring a case. It was always they were trying to shut it down all the time.
But given that you have your own footage of the occasion when you're preaching, I don't know if you record it every time, do you sometimes have very clear evidence of someone who is, abusing you or inflicting violence on you? And if so, if you have that evidence, do you then present that to the police?
Yes, and that evidence now is getting better. Obviously, the camera that I use, the body-worn camera, doesn't take a 360-degree view. It goes only where you point, so depending on if I'm pointing this way, somebody comes from this side, you can't really see it. Whatever footage. We have used recent footage that was used last year outside the University of Bristol. A Bristol security officer gave me a fine for what she called idling or something. I don't know what that's called. She used a anyway. She tried to say I was breaching the peace in some way, and I wasn't. And we wrote to them and we presented the evidence from the body camera, and all we asked for was the person go under training, the person be retrained in how to interact with the public. Well, Bristol City decided that they're not going to retrain the person. They fired the person and sent me a letter of apology. So in that way, the body camera worked in the sense that it picked up all the footage of what the person was, how the person was interacting with me, and how I was interacting with them.
Right. Regarding the police presence, I just have one other question about the police presence. You experienced racial abuse. Again, I ask, were there police present on that occasion or occasions?
Yes, there were police present. And it's the way they even speak to us. And this is what I'm saying. I have a congregation that's predominantly non-white that does not want to call the police anymore. So, for example, even on Saturday, when I was being assaulted, our congregation's first response is, "No, we're not going to call the police," because we know how they would respond. The reason the police were there is because the crowd called the police, and then the police came to me and said, "We heard you got assaulted. What do you want to do?" But normally, they are very non-welcoming of anything we want to say to them. And if you say to them, we think this is racial abuse or whatever, it's almost like we have to have 110% proof of what we're saying in order to just get a conversation with them, rather than us saying, "Okay, actually we're victims here right now. How can you help us to overcome this?" And then give us a solution of how to go forward. Like, for example, the young people who assaulted me on Saturday, I'm really not taking any case against them at all. I was doused with so much of liquid. and he did so many things, but I'm not taking any case against them. All I said to the officer was, let's talk to them and let's, sit down with them, and they can write a little letter about how to learn to be more tolerant of other religions, other beliefs, how to engage in a proper conversation, how to not be religiously biased. Let them write like an essay or something, so where they can learn something from it. Because I don't want them to go to court and have their name blackened by assault or something.
I just have a couple of other questions for now. In the evidence bundle, the large evidence bundle you sent us, in paragraph 30, we learned that the officer with whom you had established a very good, positive relationship, he was going to be promoted, so you had to actually deal with another officer, and you didn't feel that this new officer was actually cooperating with you in the same way. You didn't feel that he was positively engaging with you, and you felt that he was questioning your very Christian, your Christian beliefs. Can you tell us exactly what happened?
Yeah, so Inspector Rob Cheeseman was the man I got involved with, and we were making such good progress that I literally said to him one day, I said, two things can happen, Rob. One, you're going to die, or two, you're going to get promoted. Let's prepare all our emails, let's prepare all our work so we can hand over to the next person. I don't want to have to come back and start again. And so that's literally what happened. He didn't die, obviously, he got promoted. And somebody took his place. And from the first day I met that man, Adam Doling, from the first day I met him, one of the first things he said to me was, "Dear, you need to understand that not everybody agrees with your interpretation of the Bible." And this is, again, it was not a Bible study meeting. It's a meeting to discuss the legalities of the preaching and how we can learn from each other. And that's the first thing. And when he said that, I knew we were going to have trouble with him. But I didn't let that stop me. I kept meeting with him all the time. And he would try to put as much hindrance before me, in the sense of to stop us from preaching. So, for example, if we normally preach for 4 hours, and he would say, "Well, I don't have officers for 4 hours. Can you do 2 hours?" And I would say, "Okay, I'll do 2 hours." And he'd send officers for 2 hours. And then at another time, he'd say, "I know you normally do 2 hours. Can you do 1 hour? Because only can have an officer for 1 hour." And so he's always trying to restrict it smaller and smaller and smaller. And he kept doing that over a number of months, to such a point where we said, "No, we can still carry on preaching, whether there are officers there or not." And then he would say, "Oh, if you go and preach, we can't guarantee you're going to be safe," and so forth and so on. And then this idea, he was the man who kept bringing up the matter of interpretation, kept bringing up the fact that there were other Christians on the force who had come to listen to me and who vehemently disagree with our interpretation of the Bible. So he kept bringing that up in all the meetings.
My other question is actually connected to this very same theme. When you attended the meeting at which they served you with a community protection warning, and you explained to us why you decided you wouldn't sign it, an officer present at that meeting, which I understand was recorded, so we know that this is a word-for-word transcription, he said to you, "I have no problem with you preaching the Bible. The problem is with your interpretations." Would you like to elaborate a little about what was said in that context at that meeting, please?
Well, that's the same officer that I'm talking about. That's the same inspector.
I see.
The same inspector. So he kept making that case even at that point. So yeah, he was the same officer who said that.
I see. Okay, I've got some further questions, but I'll park them for now. Thank you very much, dear. Back to Tony. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Dear, thank you. I mean, first of all, thank you for doing what you're doing. As Christians ourselves, we're very conscious of the need to really celebrate people who are willing to stand up. And at the end of the day, if you really care about these people, and if you really believe in the gospel, how can you do anything other than go onto the street and tell people about it? Mm-hmm. It's a warning you're giving, protecting them from eternal damnation and offering them eternal life. It's it's not, you're not trying to sell a product here. You're not trying to undermine a political party. You're trying to believe what your heart tells you about something which is of immortal significance to their existence. A couple of just mundane things, just for clarification in my head. So there were 2 orders placed upon you. The one was withdrawn, and I think it was upon, if I'm right, it was upon the second order that you and these orders were to restrict your practices. It was the second order at which point you then took the police to court.
Yes.
And so, but then this and the first order, they withdrew it anyway. The second order is still in place. I mean, you went to court. You seem from the documentation to have been successful in court, but the second order is still in place. Perhaps you could explain that to me.
Yeah, I think the first order had a few things. So basically, when we sat in the meeting, I challenged them on it. When they served me the notice on the day, I challenged them on it. And the response from the investigating officer was, listen, we don't need you to challenge us on this. Our legal department has actually gone through this with a fine-tooth comb, and we're acting on our legal department. So in other words, they made an outright statement on the recording that this is legally sound before bringing it to me. When we took it to our solicitors, they said it's not legally sound, and therefore we challenged them on it. Within the first month, we challenged them on it. We sent them a letter. Excuse me. They responded by putting the second notice through my door, through my front door, and that was the second notice, which was a much more smaller notice, but still had the elements of don't talk to an evolutionist or an atheist and LGBTQ derogatory language, and obviously it was much smaller and more concise on their part. So they gave it a bit more thought. We thought they will withdraw it completely, but to me it felt like they knew they were wrong, but they were trying to save face. I felt they knew they were wrong. So what else can they do to try and stop it or stop the preaching? They issued the second notice. So you're right. We challenged them on the second notice.
So that second notice seems to be still in place. Is that so? They haven't withdrawn that. So that's is it still existent?
No, it's not. It's
not.
Oh,
right.
Well, no, it's not. So I think it's only valid for a few months anyway. It's about 6 months or 7 months.
Okay.
So within that time, we sought counsel legally and spiritually. So within that time, while we were working through our case, it was very, as you can basically understand, it's quite emotionally trying for us as a congregation. Because where do we find the money to fund this, and how do we do this, and so it's emotionally trying for us. And we're not a large congregation, neither are we a wealthy congregation. A lot of our people are on benefits and so forth and so on. So it was very hard for us. And during that time, we changed strategies slightly so that we don't mess our case up. So we took to other forms of evangelism, but still maintained some street presence. And during that time, we started to build our case. So that was valid for about, I think, 6 months. I think is the time it is valid for. After that, we still, again, although the notices are expired, we still continue with the case because, I was asked, why do you still want to go forward with this now that this is expired? I said, because if we don't do something about it now, they're going to try this again. And again, count the cost. I had to count the cost. How far am I prepared to go for this? With this. So basically, I was trying to have a win for all Christians and for all who want to stand in the public square. And for anyone who wants to come to Bristol to preach, or whether this can be applied to other cities, that the police tried to stop here, and a Christian stood up to them. A Christian church, stood up to them, and they've had to withdraw it.
So, can I ask, where is the legal case now? Are you what's going on? What's
that's completely settled. They've paid the legal fees. I think the legal fees came to about £70,000.
Right.
So that's been done. That's settled now. That's over and done with. We had an advocacy group called ADF that came up towards the end of the case, and they were very helpful to me. And from that, we formed a relationship. And they're trying to assist me on another case now, because in all of this, really, with the first case, I've never been arrested in 7 years. I've never had a fine or a notice, nothing. I've kept such a good reputation with the police. Tried my best to make sure because I didn't want to get arrested. I didn't want my congregation to go through this. So obviously, with the notice being issued, they said that if you're going to continue, we're going to escalate this. We're going to bring criminal charges against you. And as we fought that, we won that. They had to pay, I think, about £70,000 worth of fees. And they said that obviously their actions towards me was not right. But last year I got arrested for the first time. I answered a question for 2 minutes. I had to spend 13 hours in a prison cell for a 2-minute answer. But ADF's looking at the case at the moment to whether we're taking that case forward.
Okay, so that, yeah, because I noticed that looking up on the web, there is that thing which is still live, which we don't have documentation for, so we can't really probe at all. But yeah, so that it's still, and I suppose in the context of, so you were dealing with one officer who seemed to be very helpful, and then there was a change of personnel, and then the relationships all changed. In your opinion, what was the approach based on the individual's affinity to what you were saying, rather than the law? I mean, what the second guy, who had a radically different approach from the first officer, was that because he had interpreted the law differently, or was that because he simply didn't like what you were saying and doing?
So on the second one, yes, the second guy, Adam Dolan, he genuinely came in with an agenda.
Right,
He knew what was happening, and he wanted to shut down the preaching.
right,
He didn't want us talking about, because he would literally say to me, "Would you not preach on this today? Would you not preach on this?" They wanted me to submit to them even. Probably I didn't say that in my introduction or in my previous responses. But excuse me, there came a time where they wanted me to submit to them what I was preaching, and I said, "I'm not going to do that." And said, can you stay away from a particular subject,
yeah,
like abortion and things like that?" I said, we don't go out, like, for example, when we're talking about abortion, like I said earlier on, we try to base it as much as possible on the scriptures and our response from the scriptures. So I would say to them, I'm preaching the 10 Commandments, this Saturday. And the 10 Commandments would include murder is anger of heart, and murder of taking another human life. And you get to the commandment of thou shalt not commit adultery, and we'll talk about fornication and adultery and all the other things that go with it, and defining what adultery is, defining what
yeah,
political marriage is. So we can't stay away from those kind of subjects.
yeah.
But they
Right,
wanted me strictly not to use those words at all in the public square.
right. That's very interesting. And how much of that do you think was based on their personal belief or disagreement with what you were saying, versus their desire, and I suppose here's the other question, to maintain public order? So from your point of view, they don't want a situation where anyone is getting beaten up in public. Yep. And so they want to avoid that happening in the first place. And so in the back of their mind is, well, I want to stop you saying this because it's the saying of this which provokes somebody's reaction, which then gets you beaten up. So
Mm.
how much of it do you think is based on, look, we just want to maintain public order, so can you not say this, as opposed to, we don't like what you're saying, so don't say it?
Yeah, I think it's very much the second part from my experience. They disguise it under the fact that they're there to protect us. We don't
Okay.
believe that to be the case. We've said that openly to them. They come with a particular bias. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to have officers who, I've literally heard officers say to me when I sat down with them, they say to me, "Oh, we're old school. We do things differently. We won't take the approach that the newer officer takes. So we wouldn't respond to every complaint," they said, that the public makes. They will say the preacher has a right to say those things. Then you give another officer who's like completely different, but yet they're wearing the same uniform. And they
Mm,
literally will say to me, "Well, we have different ways of how we applied what we learned." And
mm,
I couldn't wrap my head around that. I couldn't get my head around that because we
mm,
don't know who's responding to us. Is it an old school officer or is it a
mm,
new school officer? We don't know.
mm.
To such a point, I think that ADF said on the case that we'd won, that ADF said that they were going to write to the College of Policing to say, "This is what's happened to Mr Moodley in Bristol. What lessons can we learn from this? And
Yeah.
how can we apply it to your training?" But I'm not sure how far they've gone with that. But to answer your question, I don't think they were responding on the matter of our protection. I think they were responding because they personally wanted to shut down the preaching.
So, in an ideal world, how do you think the police should respond? So you've got an environment on a Saturday morning, you're preaching faithfully from the scripture. Some people hate what you're saying and want to hurt you because of it, and want to literally knock you off your pedestal, right? In that situation, how do you think the police should respond? Should they usher you away and ask you to stop preaching? Should they arrest the people? Should they? What's the ideal response you're looking for from the police?
So the ideal response would be, that's a good question. The ideal response would be, an officer walks up to me and says, can we have a word? And we step down and we have a word. And he says, okay, the crowd's becoming volatile, whatever the case. Would you mind stopping for 2 minutes, 3 minutes? And we'd have no problem with that whatsoever at all. Would stop. But yes, officer, we know what you're trying to do. We'll stop. And so we're working with the constabulary on that. That continues to be our policy, to work with the officers on that. But what we'd like to see is that, I mean, the officers would have no problem in coming up to me and saying to me, what you're saying is offensive, without any evidence at all. So it's hearsay. Somebody's heard me say something and they've taken it out of context. And the officer would have no problem believing the crowd and saying, oh, you said this. Now we want to question you on this, without any evidence. But if we had to say somebody's done something or said something, and we actually have evidence, we have eyewitnesses here who've heard it, they're not prepared to listen to that. So basically, in all our meetings, what I was saying to them was, it has to be equal. If we're going to apply this, it has to be equal. And I literally said in all the meetings with Rob Cheeseman, even with Adam Doling, I said, if I've broken the law, please bring the sword of justice down on me. Romans 13, bring it down on me because I've broken the law. But if they've broken the law, why aren't you bringing down the sword of justice on them? You know, that's what we'd like to see. Because I know in the meetings, that sort of question was asked of me. Well, what would you like the police to do? I said, I would like you to uphold the law. If I'm breaking the law, arrest me. But if they're breaking the law, you got to do something about that, because this is going to continue if you don't. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that's fine. We'll have another quick round if that's okay. If you've got the patience for it, dear.
Yeah, I've got no problem. Go for it.
Follow-up questions, and we'll go straight to Linda again. Over to you, Linda.
Thanks, Tony. Just a few questions, really. You've spoken about the fact that the police have paid your costs. Did you make any claim for damages, and were any damages paid to you?
No, I didn't. Our solicitor, initially we thought we were going to get damages, and I've learned from this. I've learned a lot from this process. It's made me wiser in how I move forward. And so even with the new case now, I'm being more careful in what I want to claim and not claim and so forth. We thought we could get damages from this, but eventually, I think because I was trying to fund the case myself, I was careful of how far we can push and how much more I got to pay for every step that a barrister comes down and does something and all that. I think in a way, there was a little cold feet on the side of my legal team, which I can understand. But now I know a lot better. I know how to ask things a little better. I've learned a lot from the previous case. I'd like to, in a way, don't misquote me, I'd like to punch a little harder and higher and now, in the sense of whatever we're doing, even with the new case. I don't want to do it because I want to win. I want to do it because if we're going to spend this money, what can we gain from this that people can learn from? I'm not going to spend God's money on a case that I'm vindicated in. I'm going to spend God's money on a case that we could learn from. That somebody could say, oh, here's a case. This is what's happened. What can we learn from that? So that's what I'm always trying to pursue. I do believe that if we had pursued some sort of financial settlement, that the police would have had a harder lesson to learn. I think they got away too easily with this, because it's really not their money. It's really not their money. £70,000 there from their pocket? No, it's taxpayers' money. In fact, a British news reporter wrote an article on that, an entire page on it. He spoke about how the police is paying taxpayers' money to the preachers' legal expenses, which is absolutely right. They don't care. It's not their money. And I think personally that I shared this with my solicitor, that they think they got away. They need to pay a higher price for what they're doing.
I think that would seem a very fair point, actually, dear. I would back you in that one. We've spoken an awful lot about the opposition that you encountered, but I'm just wondering, did any Christian churches or groups around support you?
Well, let's say, I'll put it to you this way. I'm a Reformed Baptist minister, which means my soteriology, my eschatology, and all that, we're very definite in what we believe. We adhere to the 1689 London Baptist Confession and things like that. And I'm part of a Baptist kind of group of people, ministers. In all the time that we went through this, not a single minister reached out to me at all. At all. Not a single minister reached out to me. And I shared this with one of them. And I know why. And I know why churches don't want to come anywhere near this. It's because we're sometimes talking about things that are not. Let me just put it to you this way. If my church employed a consultant to come to my church and say to my church, how can we grow this congregation to 200 people? Bring a consultant in to consult with us. The consultant will spend 1 month with us, listening to all my sermons, listening to how we do Bible study and all that. And the consultant will say, here's how you grow this church. Fire this man. Fire this man and you'll grow the church. Because the man is talking too much about sin. He's talking too much about repentance. He's talking too much about hell. He's got a very Puritan approach. So therefore, fire him. If you fire him and he doesn't talk about these things, people will come to your church. Because you're not talking about that which troubles them. They want to come and hear a good, feel-good message, some sugar, blah, blah, blah. They want that. I think that's the issue here. Churches are keeping their distance from me, and I can understand that because they don't want to get any nail that sticks up. It's going to get hammered. I had a church minister who said to me, he loves the work that we're doing on the abortion ministry. He wants to stand with me, but he can't because his elders told him, that's not what we employ you to do. So he's scared he's going to lose his job. So this is widespread. I mean, there's too many reasons why we don't get the support we do. But I hold nothing against them. I got to stand alone before God, and I got to do what the Bible says we need to do. I would have appreciated the support, but we didn't get it.
That is a little concerning, actually, hearing you say that, because it's saying that the churches are frightened to actually stand on their supposed belief. I say supposed because if they're not actually going to stand up and defend it, that is a little concerning there, or even very concerning.
Sorry, Linda. I think the Church of England's, when I said they wrote the 3 pages, I think that speaks broadly about how they see this type of preaching. They see it as we need to learn something from them, and I've got no problem in learning from the Church of England the lessons that I need to learn. But on a theological basis, they were wrong about this. In the sense that we should not be preaching about judgment and hell and sin and so forth. So they would stand against us and would oppose us, and they made their opposition clear by siding with the police on this. I mean, if the police had approached them and said, "Hey, we got a guy here called Mr Moodley, he's doing all of this," I believe the Bishop of Bristol should have said, "Let me write this Pastor DM a letter and invite him for coffee and ask him, what on earth are you doing? We heard this thing about you," but yet she's never done that. But they compile a report with the police against me, against the church, and that's just so wrong. I mean, I would do that. If I heard a minister is in trouble for something, that's what I would do. I'd invite him for coffee, sit down with him. How can I help you? What can I do? But they didn't do that. So clearly they have their own agenda.
Yes, sadly, that is not actually terribly surprising. Have you noticed with your own fellowship that the numbers have grown at all as a result of your outreach?
Yeah, that's a good question. We get asked that all the time. We have not, in the 8 years that we've been preaching, seen phenomenal growth, but that's not the reason why we've done it. We recognize that when Jesus says preach, he says preach. He doesn't say preach that they might be converted. The conversion is the gift of God by the Spirit, the effectual calling of the Spirit. We cannot convert people. My responsibility is to preach. But if you ask me, is the preaching 100% successful? I'll say yes, it's 100% successful. How is it 100% successful? Because it's obedience to the commission. So if we're being obedient to God, that's 100% success. What God does with that is God. He's sovereign in that. But if people come through that, yes. People have heard. A young man came a couple of weeks ago. He's become part of the fellowship, and that's coming through that. I've had another lady who's she's no longer part of our congregation, but moved to another city. She was a person who heard me speak about abortion, and she later testified that she absolutely hated me because I spoke about it. She and her mom were swearing at me. She became a Christian, came up and spoke to me and said, "I heard you, and now a year later, I'm a Christian." And we had a good conversation. And she goes to one of our partner churches in Cheltenham, and do I want to see more people come? Yes. Do I make that clear in my prayer? Yes. Has it happened? No. Is the UK tough ground? Absolutely. I come from South Africa. I've just come from a ministry trip from South Africa. I've been offered to pastor a church there. They said, please, would you come back and pastor the church? And it's so much easier because people are so much more receptive. Here, the ground is so hard. It's absolutely hard. But this is where God's called us to be. And we'll continue to labor here.
Yeah, not a numbers game, is it?
No.
Coming back to the opposition, were you able to, I know you picked up on various individuals, various troublemakers, and that you knew the police were behind some of this, but have you also been aware of any organizing groups who are kind of orchestrating some of these troublemakers? And if so, what are they?
No, we haven't. We have seen people call other people and get them to respond, but I think they were just individuals. We did have an interaction once with the LGBTQ Bristol group. That's with the first case that Christian Concern were involved with. And when the men were convicted on the first case and they lost the first case, the head of the LGBTQ group in Bristol said to me that this is the worst thing to happen, that these Christians were arrested and taken to court. And I asked why. He said, because the worst thing that can happen is for a group to go underground. He said, everyone should be able to speak. And I thought that was very refreshing from him, just to say that. He said, we disagree, but you shouldn't have to be, your freedom of speech should not be taken away. Again, he is the guy who moved on. And I apart from me, what I didn't talk about in my introduction is I've worked with various groups trying to build bridges. So one with the police, trying to work with them so that we could do things better, but also with the LGBTQ community. I said to them, because I've had people from the LGBTQ community come and say to us that they've discussed me and our congregation within that group. And so I said, okay, if that's the case, let me step into that group and let me have coffee with you and things like that, which I've decided, because what was happening was, and this hasn't happened recently, which we thank God for, I was getting spat on quite a bit by those who were claiming to be from the LGBTQ community. And so it went into my eyes and my face and whatever, And so I wrote a letter to them. Said, listen, I'd like to sit down with you and talk to you at some point. If you can get the message out somewhere that you sat and spoke to me, I'm really not a bad guy. We really not a bad bunch of people. We want to engage in conversation, but we really believe biblically this is what it is. Leave us to ourselves. And if you find me preaching whatever and you don't want to get involved, just walk past, leave it alone. They literally got back to me and said, no, they're not prepared to sit down with me at all. And went on to ask me how many people in my church are LGBTQ plus I am, all that. And so how many people are actually part of this group? If I say there are 10 people then or 5 people, then I'm welcome to a meeting with them. And so I tried my best there and I couldn't get anywhere with them. Regarding Islam, I've written to the imams in the city asking for a meeting. I've had no response from them. So I wanted to sit down with the imams because I've been threatened a couple of times. Muslim men have said, we're going to come and slit your throat. We're going to find out where you live and things like that. So I said that one of the best ways to do this is to talk with the imams. And the other reason as well is because some of the worst offenders are young Muslim girls. And I spoke to a Muslim about it. And he said, absolutely, you're absolutely right, because the way they leave home, the parents think that they're deeply, deeply religious. And when they step out of their homes, they become something else. And I've had, burqa wearing women swear at me the most vilest things. So I wanted to sit down with an imam and say, hey, do you know what's happening in the community? How can we work together? And again, no response. So whether I'll do that again, I'm not sure. I don't have the time for it, but we did try those things. So to answer your question, I don't know of any groups in particular who have been called to oppose the preaching.
But the death threats you mentioned coming from some within the Muslim community, have you reported those to the police?
Yes, we have.
And what action was taken?
Nothing was taken. Again, it's down to the burden of proof is upon us. We had to show who it is. And in a crowd. Sorry?
These were verbal threats made
yes,
to you?
Verbal threats, yeah. Yeah, verbal.
Right, okay, thank you very much. I think that's all my questions.
Great, thanks, Linda. Robert, any more?
Thank you, Tony. Yes, dear, I have a few other questions, if I may. Some of our discussion this morning has focused on the negative responses from the crowds. But given that the responses are going to be very varied, and we know that from the evidence bundle. It's been very varied. Can you give us some examples of the positive responses that you have had from members of the public? Typical positive responses.
What a super question, and it's one of the things that keeps us going. I get asked all the time, why put your congregation through this? Why do you get, summertime's coming up now. I'll guarantee you, I'll get slushies, milkshakes thrown at me. Wintertime, it's hot coffee and all that stuff. Why? Because one, it's the obedience to God in what we're trying to do. And two, you can see that even if the person does not on that day respond positively, God in his word tells us that somehow, somewhere, something's going to happen in the sense of their conviction. We've known many people who've heard the gospel on a Tuesday in 1979, but got converted on a Wednesday in 1985. By what somebody said on that Tuesday in 1979. God works in that way. And so we're going to continue to do that. Secondly, or thirdly, we see the number of young people respond. I have such a great heart for, I'm not from the United Kingdom. I was born in South Africa. I moved here 27 years ago. And I find myself in a position where I'm lamenting over this nation, and especially over the young people. They have no mentors. They have no role models. They're breaking the commandment of, okay, if you ask me why young people, why young white girls between the age of 13 and 22 are so violent in the public square, the reason is not the problem in the public square. The problem is in their homes. The dishonor of mother and father, they're breaking that commandment. There is no respect in the home. And if there's no respect in the home, they become terrorists in the public square. And so I can see that as a church minister. I can see where the problem is. The problem is not their violence in the public square. The problem is at home and how they're being raised and how they have no respect for their own parents. So when I'm preaching, that comes out in the preaching. It comes out in the way we're addressing them. And I'm going to continue to do that. So we see that we see this as a positive thing. People do this one. And then fourthly, when we speak about things like, for example, evolution or abortion or atheism or Islam or Hinduism or whatever it may be, I often have people come up afterwards and said, I listened to you and I didn't want to respond at that time, but now can I talk to you? And they'll end up pouring out their life to me, and say, really, that was me that you're talking about. How can I make a change? What can I do? And we appreciate those precious moments. And even for example, on the abortion issue, if a woman comes up and you can discern that, this is what she's going through, I'll step down from the ladder. I won't worry about the crowd. We'll step down from the ladder and we'll concentrate on this one person. The whole team knows that, because she needs our immediate help at the moment. So to answer your question, positive, yes, people do respond in a positive way. Very often, very young boys would come up afterwards as well and have a talk with us. And those good one-to-one conversations are really good. But it took that public preaching to bring that conversation, that one-to-one conversation. So yes, there's a lot of positive things that have happened.
Thank you. Another question I have, was there at any stage an actual injunction that was attempted against you?
When you say injunction, I'm not sure what that means, but the only thing that was attempted against me was the warning notice. Apart from that, nothing else.
I would just like to read a small extract from the evidence bundle on page 65. It brings up a lot of issues to do with freedom of speech, and I just wanted your response to this. So it says, I think they were maybe anticipating an injunction, even though it never happened. They say the implementation of an injunction seeks to protect the health and morals of young and vulnerable members of the community, as well as adults caused distress by the often offensive nature of Mr. Moodley's responses to issues surrounding homosexuality and abortion. And this is the key point that I want to focus on. The next bit is, a city centre is not the place to confront people with or provoke them into debating such sensitive topics. The police and court system needs to consider people may be profoundly affected by such rhetoric and take action to safeguard them. What I would like to ask you, Dia, is many people who are watching this discussion may be very unfamiliar with Christianity. They may not understand why preachers are in the public square, what their motives are, what their values are, what their reasons are for what they say. Could you just explain, if given that people will be offended by some things that anyone says, you know, we don't, it's very subjective, isn't it? Offense is a very subjective thing. What I might find offensive, you might not find offensive. So given that the gospel message is inevitably going to offend some, if not many people, we know that, that's just a fact. Given what you do, what would be your explanation as to why you believe that what you do is absolutely right, and that in a society that honors free speech, what you do is very much in line with the values of free speech? Can you just elaborate more on how your activity fits into a democratic society that is honoring free speech?
Yeah, so thank you for that, Robert. I think one of the fundamental principles we hold as a Christian congregation is that we step out into the public square. That's our mission field. It's a city that has a makeup of people from many different parts of the world. It gives us an opportunity to speak with them, to engage with them with what we believe to be the life-changing message of Jesus Christ. This is the spiritual conviction, but also the historical conviction. We can appeal to history to show how through Christianity nations have changed for the better in the value for life. We believe, like for example, in history past, one of the reasons why what was happening in Europe didn't cross over the channel to England was because the church was very much involved in how they taught Christianity, and not only in the church but outside the church, in the sermons within the church, yes, but in the public proclamation of the gospel outside of the church, where hearts were being changed. We believe that a nation doesn't change only by the changing of a law. We believe that the nation changes when the Lord of God changes the heart. And so we're not standing on a lectern or a ladder to ask, Keir Starmer to change the law in the land. We're standing on a lectern and a ladder and saying, here's the Lord of God. Because if it changes your heart, it changes who you are and how you respond. So, for example, when Black Lives Matter was tearing our city down, I was the only Christian preacher in the city standing and saying, the only way that lives matter is when you change the heart. I said that racism is not the condition of the skin or the color of the skin, but the condition of the heart. And I said, you will realize that all lives matter when your heart changes. So changing the law is never going to change anyone's heart. If you change the law, people will just go underground and believe the same thing. So the gospel message is so important for the nation. I believe that our nation will improve, get better, be more family oriented, hold up to more moral values, not by what the government says, but by what the church says. And I think this is the responsibility upon the church, both in the pulpit and in the public square. I believe that a criminal, in the same way, a criminal will not walk into a police station and confess, I'm a criminal, I have committed a crime. I believe in the same way, a sinner is not going to walk into a church and say, I've sinned, what can I do to be saved? Yes, it does happen. People do that sometimes. Most often, through the example of Jesus and Paul and the early church, and all through church history, we find people leaving the church, passing through the church doors and entering into the mission field in order to engage with those who need the gospel message, who need to hear of the life-changing message of Jesus Christ. I'm a Hindu. I was a Hindu. I was born a Hindu. I became a Christian. I know how Jesus transformed my life. I know what I thought about Christianity. I grew up in apartheid South Africa. I grew up under a government in South Africa that told me that Jesus Christ was a white man's God, and all of you that are black belong to the devil. So I hated Jesus Christ. I hated all Christians. When people came to minister to me about Jesus Christ, I literally chased them from my house. I went from being a hater of Jesus to becoming a lover of Christ. How did that happen? Somebody told me about Jesus Christ. Somebody took the time to tell me about the life-changing gospel of Jesus Christ. So I want to take time to tell someone about the life-changing gospel of Jesus Christ. If we change a person, we change who they are in the sense of the gospel. When I say we change, I don't mean us, I mean preaching the gospel. If they change, and by God's grace, their family might change. If we have better families, we have a better nation. If we raise children biblically, we have better families, more solid families, we have a better nation of higher moral value. So therefore, we will continue to do this in the public square. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much, Dia. Thank you. Back to Tony. Thank you.
Thank you, Dia. So much has come up, and I'm very grateful for what you're doing. And I mean, maybe you could speak a little bit to conclude about how this has affected you personally, about how you intend to go forward. I mean, from a police point of view, you know, we know legally causing an offence is not an offence. You know, you're allowed to offend people in this country. And in fact, that's how we progress as a society, is by challenging and criticising each other's ideas. And that's how we grow. And yes, you know, provoking people to violence and all sorts of things, they are offensive, but you're not doing any of those things. You're just sharing the unfiltered word of God. But perhaps you, just to conclude, you can maybe tell us a little bit about your hope for the future, what keeps you going, why you're going to keep going, what you're going to do from here on, and maybe just leave us with some encouragement as to why you think this is really important that you carry on doing what you're doing.
That's an absolutely superb question, and it leads into what I'm preaching on my Lord's Day evening sermon. A few Lord's Days ago, Sundays ago, I preached from Psalm 117 that talks about how the nations will come to praise God. Who are these nations? They are not the Jewish people, they are the Gentiles. They will come to praise God. How? Through the preaching of the gospel. I'm one of those people. I'm the Gentile. I'm the people from outside the Jewish group that has come to praise God. Why? Because someone took the time to preach the gospel to me. On this Lord's Day evening, I'm preaching from the book of Exodus, speaking of how in the time of trouble, the people called out unto God and God heard them and God remembered his covenant with them. I believe that my encouragement to my congregation this Sunday is that God hears the cries of his people in the United Kingdom. That all hope, I want to shut down. When I say shut down, I mean in a sense, just talk to people who say that there's no hope for the UK. This is a losing battle. We're not going to win. You know, look at everything that's happening. Look how the church is being attacked. I want to bring encouragement to the church in the UK to say that God has not forgotten the United Kingdom, that our prayers are heard. And that's the first thing. I mean, whether God answers that, that's up to God. But my great joy is that God heard. God hears us when we pray. And that gives me, that's a great privilege for me. That's a great joy for me. That's a great encouragement. God heard us cry for the United Kingdom. And then God would not have me come to Bristol, the United Kingdom, plant a church, grow it the way it is. And to think that the work is done now, that's it, there's nothing else to do now. I think there is a work still to do. There is a commission still to achieve. There is a task still unfinished, as the hymn says. Jesus completed the task on Calvary's cross. That's finished. He said it is finished. But the mission of the church is not finished, to go forth and tell everyone about who he is. And that's what I want to do. Where we are personally as a family, I'm a father, I'm a grandfather of three. I've got two grandsons, one who's going to be 7, another is 6, and a third grandchild who is arriving into the world in June. And I want to be able to leave a legacy of faithfulness. When we were facing the case, and I kind of was put into a position where the case got a bit shaky, in a sense of, not that we were wrong, but how do I fund it? How do I move forward? Why don't I just give up and walk away? And I looked at my grandson, who was very much younger than, and I said, when he reads through history of what his grandfather did, is he going to say that my grandfather, when it came time for the crunch, he got so scared and he backed off? Or did he stick to what the scripture said? And was he convicted by what he believed? And did he stand his ground? Did he count the cost? And I went for, yes, I counted the cost to stand my ground. And I think that's what the history of my family will say. And that's what the history of our congregation would say. And I think the United Kingdom has a great history of that. In so many churches, we have rings that are metal rings outside churches where the minister used to tie his horse and walk up to the pulpit and preach. I get greatly inspired by that. And I think we need to return to the pulpit again and to preach God's word, that God's people may be equipped and they may go out into this mission field, London, Bristol, Birmingham, whatever, and continue to engage with people freely as the law allows us in this United Kingdom. We are blessed with that privilege to freely speak the great and beautiful name of Jesus Christ. I'm much proud of it. I think we can make much of it. And I'd like to continue with that.
Marvelous way to end. Dear Moodley, thank you so much for your time, your contributions. Reverend Linda Rose, thank you. Robert Harris, thank you. And I think that concludes our hearing.
Thank you all very much for your time.